it's Katie with String Expert. Today I want to talk to you how to properly care for your instrument. Now this is really important because we want to make sure that we're constantly maintaining the quality of our instrument. If we're not careful with our instrument, we can easily damage it and cause a repair that may render your violin completely unplayable. So we don't want that. So let's get started learning. The first thing that we really have to pay attention to with the violin is avoiding any major temperature swings with our instrument. So we don't want the instrument to be too hot or too cold or have too extreme temperatures. So I like to tell people is to treat your violin like you would a kid or your pet dog. You would never leave a child in a hot car. You would never leave your pet dog in a hot car, so you'd never leave your violin in the car either. Because what happens is the wood expands and then the seams break and your instrument is broken, and in some cases the repair cost can be more than the instrument is worth. Also, when you have a lot of big temperature fluctuations, your bridge can also curve and become warped, and you can also have cracks on the top of the instrument. So it's very important to maintain a consistent temperature. So what I do typically in the hot summer and in the winter time, and I would say 99% of the time, is I just bring my instrument in with me. For example, last week I had something I had to go to, and then I wanted to go to the gym. I needed my violin for the first event, and so I just brought my violin into the gym. It sat there, I worked out, everybody gave me a hard time about it, but you know, it's a good story. And then when I went home, my violin was safe, it was in good shape, it wasn't broken. So that's really what I care about more so than anything else. And stores don't care if you bring in the instrument, they don't even notice half the time. So it's really just not that big of a deal, but it is a big deal if you leave your instrument in a car and it gets wrecked. The next thing to consider with instrument care is to make sure that you keep a good level of humidity. A lot of states are dry states, and it's so important to keep a high level of humidity. So what I would recommend doing is getting a humidifier that sits in your instrument and keeps it moist. Then the other thing that I would also do on top of that is I actually have a large humidifier like you would use if you were sick, and I put that in my office, and every few days I run that humidifier in order to fully hydrate my violins. And these guys up here, they sit up here permanently, but I have two humidifiers that I set up, and they just run constantly in order to make sure that the violins don't get too dried out, because that's a real risk when you do something like this. The next thing to consider too is just being very mindful and very careful with your violin when you're traveling. So don't swing it around, don't mess with it, that type of a thing. Even though it's in its case, it can still be easily damaged. A lot of people choose to put their instruments in a violin bag. That's going to maintain and keep the varnish of the instrument, so that's really important. The next thing to consider is a lot of times accidents happen when you put your violin in the violin case and when you take it out. So what you want to do is when you put your violin in the case, you want to make sure that it's secure at the neck in order to not fall out. Then the second thing to do is when you put your bow in, make sure that you turn the knob in order for your bow to stay completely secure. My luthier said that he has more issues with students breaking the top of their instruments by their bow falling out when they open up the case and the bow isn't secure than any other time. So it's important to secure your bow. And then secondly, there's a nice padded cover that goes on top of your instrument that comes with 99% of all cases. Make sure that you go ahead and cover that in order to keep the violin protected. And then of course there's the obvious, like don't leave your violin sitting on a chair where young people can get to it. Be very careful when you're walking. For example, I had a good friend of mine, she was at a concert, she was holding her violin just like this underneath her arm. She reached down to play with a kid The kid did not mean to hurt the instrument at all. She reached back up. In a freak accident, the violin went flying, did a spin, and landed on the floor, completely broken. And things like this happen. Bows get broken a lot too, so don't use your violin as a sword. Just be very careful with it. Typically when I walk around, like if I have a concert or something, I put the violin underneath my arm like this. I hold it securely with this hand. I put my bow in this finger and I wrap this around so it's tight, and then I hold it with this hand. And this is my death grip. Don't mess with my violin. I don't want to get it broken. If I walk around like this, more often than not, I end up banging into things, breaking things, and ruining my instrument. So be very, very careful and mindful about that. And then finally, rosin builds up on your instrument. So make sure that you get a chamois, get a really nice soft cloth of some sort that's clean. Old t-shirts I've heard work really well as long as they're clean. And just go ahead and clean off the surface of your instrument after you're done practicing every time. And then of course loosen your bow. It's loose now as you can see, but you turn this every time so it's loose before you put it in the case so that the bow also doesn't get broken. So that's the basics of violin care. I hope you enjoyed watching. We'll see you next time at String Expert.